a recording of these discussions available. That if for whatever reason you cannot make it to class, you can watch them. However, I do suggest you be here for discussion, because the dynamic of these discussions will actually be hopefully like a discussion rather than a lecture. And those only really work if people show up and respond to some of the prompts that I'm going to give you throughout the semester. All right, so recording's on, we're good to go. Welcome everyone, this is Psych 101. I am Dr. Justin Milgilsky. So the first thing that I teach any of my students is that when someone sits down in front of you and says that they are going to be lecturing you or providing you information for the next about 3 months, you should probably get to know who they are, what their qualifications are, what their source of information is, et cetera, et cetera. So my first line of evidence to that end is that I do have doctor in front of my name, but that only means so much. What that does tend to mean is that I've been trained to ask questions about the world around me and to realize just how little I actually know. That's what a doctorate will give you. More than that, though, what I have done, so I am by title, I am a research psychologist. I do teach. This is my primary job. This is what I get paid the most money to do. But what gets me up in the morning, what keeps me motivated, what really just kind of gives me focus in life is the research that I do. And I do a fair amount of research on romantic relationships, what factors are involved in how people initiate romantic relationships, how they form them, how they maintain those romantic relationships, and how they dissolve them, how they break up. What I do is I use scientific theory, specifically I use evolutionary theory to design predictions, scientific predictions. I then gather data from people to test those predictions. I analyze that data using statistical analyses, and then I write up the data in a narrative and publish it in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. That's basically what I do. And what I'm going to be doing throughout this class is in part trying to take the expertise that I have in doing that and teach it to you. Alongside all of that, I'm going to be trying to give you the foundations of psychology. This is an intro to psychology class. I'll be giving you the foundations, but that is kind of the higher level skill that I hope to give you. So I want to give a bit of evidence as to what research I've published, and again, some of that evidence that I am someone maybe worth listening to, perhaps worth believing as I say something. So, like I said, I've published various peer-reviewed journal articles on my scientific research. Does anyone know what a peer-reviewed journal article is? What makes something peer-reviewed?
It's reviewed by other experts in your field?
Correct. So when I collect data, when I ask people questions about certain things and I write up that data, if you work for a newspaper, if you work for a magazine, if you work for et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that you're writing, that data might be reviewed by an editor who simply checks it for making sure nothing's spelled incorrectly, make sure it's not going to cause too much of a hullabaloo. But they don't really necessarily check the data within it or check the facts or the reasoning of the argument within what you're saying or what you're writing or trying to publish. In a peer-reviewed academic journal, what it looks like is there are a bunch of people trying to collect data to become kind of a well-known name in the field. And so we're all basically competing with one another to reveal the most interesting and hopefully truthful information. And so what we do is when we collect data, we write it up, we submit it to the journal. Once it gets into the hands of the editor of that journal, the editor will send it out to several other experts. And just like me, who actually collect their own data, who are motivated to rip me and my arguments apart. And so there are about 2-3 people who will then rip my paper apart, try to figure out the weaknesses of my data, and then they'll give me feedback and say, well, you need to address this, or, okay, this is pretty good, we can publish this. So I have to go through that many, many times, and then eventually, usually after like a year, possibly even 2 years, an article gets published. So it's a very rigorous process. I mean, it should be a rigorous process. In my experience, it typically has been. where you collect data, but you get this feedback from other experts in the field who are motivated to rip you apart. So it's a very competitive, it's a very, I think, rigorous process for vetting good quality work from lesser quality work. So I want to introduce a few of the studies that I have published. My earliest research, so I mentioned, for those of you who came a little bit late, I mentioned that my research is primarily about initiation, maintenance, and dissolution or breaking up of romantic relationships. The earliest study that I published was in a journal called Evolutionary Psychology in the year 2013. An article entitled "Friendship as a Relationship Infiltration Tactic During Human Mate Poaching." I've gotten pretty far from this topic at this point, but I find that this is, it was a very interesting topic for me, and I find it a good way to introduce the class. Does anyone want to take a guess as to what mate poaching is? What does that sound like?
You said mate poaching?
Sounds like a form of hunting.
It is a form of hunting. So rather than hunting animals, rather than actually violently killing something, this is you are attempting to attract and enter a relationship, whether it's sexual or whether it's emotional, enter a relationship with someone who is already in a relationship. So that is, instead of going after someone who's single, go after someone who is currently partnered. Now, this tends to be, if you compare the two strategies of getting together with someone who's single versus in a relationship, getting together with someone who's single tends to be a less risky or a less costly strategy for finding a romantic partner. Because if someone is with someone else, there are issues of jealousy, there's issues of potential conflict, potentially violence, things that you could avoid if you were getting together with someone single. And so one of the questions we had, me and my advisor at the time, was, well, do people engage in certain behaviors to reduce the risk of mate poaching, of going after someone who's currently in a relationship? And we identified one feature, and that is friendship. That is, if you attempt to be friends with the person that you are trying to romantically attract, or even friends with the partner of the person you're attempting to attract, does that tend to increase the chances of successfully mate poaching, or does it at least reduce the risk? And we found some evidence that it does, at least that people perceive that it is more likely to be successful if someone is friends with the partner that they're attempting to poach. So that was one of my earliest studies. From there, in 2017, this isn't chronological, but I'm highlighting I think the most salient articles here. In 2017, I published a paper called "Staying Friends with an Ex: Sex and Dark Personality Predict Motivations for Post-Relationship Friendship." That is, let's say that you break up with a partner. What influences your decision to stay friends with them afterwards? Some people have absolutely no patience for that. They say, you know what, we're broken up, we're done, I don't want to talk to you, I don't want to hear from you, it's too hard, or you're just an asshole and I can't deal with you anymore. But other people might maintain some amount of contact. Maybe you don't hang out as much as you used to, but you still hang out to some degree, or you hang out for certain reasons. So we wanted to look at the reasons why people stay friends with their exes. And up to this point, no one had really identified those many reasons, and that's what we did. So what we did was we asked people, why do you stay friends with an ex? And we identified about, I want to say 7 clusters of reasons. The top one was actually kind of predictable. It was what we eventually labeled reliability and sentimentality. That is, you were friends with this person for a long time. They mean a lot to you. They're important to your life. They've shaped you in some way. And so you want to stay friends with them because they're a good friend. They're good to have around as emotional support, as someone in your life. But we also identified reasons that we classified as pragmatic. And what that means is you stayed friends with them because it was directly beneficial to you in a almost a materialistic or an immediate way. So things like, I stayed friends with my ex because they had a car and I needed to get to work. They had money and they were willing to share that money with me. They knew how to fix stuff and I didn't know how to fix stuff, so I wanted to keep them around so that they would fix stuff for me. And then we also identified reasons like wanting to have sex with them. So maintaining friendship with an ex so that you can still have sex afterwards. So we identified a number of reasons. Some other reasons, if you had shared children, if you had a shared social group. What we did then was we looked at the degree to which men versus women will report different reasons for staying friends with an ex. And then we also measured something called dark personality. And without getting too much into the weeds here, what this describes is a person's tendency to exploit or manipulate another person for personal gain. That is, are you willing to be an asshole to someone if there's something in it for you? And so people vary on this dimension in dark personality. And so the idea here is we can administer a measure, several different measures. There are different ways of doing this to assess someone's willingness to do that. And what we found is that people who score higher on those traits, who are darker, who are willing to do those things to other people, are more likely to stay friends with their exes for pragmatic reasons. So those very materialistic reasons. As well as to have sex with their ex. The sex difference, the gender difference between men and women, men are more likely to report staying friends with an ex in order to have sex with them than women are. So there's some interesting patterns we can see in why people stay friends with an ex even after they've broken up. That's some of my mating research. I want to also highlight that I have reached outside of that. Here's a study on the bottom left. Here is a study that I did with one of my colleagues where we looked at what were called post-fight respect signals. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever gone onto YouTube and just searched for like street fights. There are plenty of videos out there, but you can go on YouTube, find a video of two people getting into a very violent fist fight on the street, and they end up punching each other and they get all bloody, and it looks like they absolutely hate each other. But at the very end of these videos, people usually always do the same thing. Does anyone want to guess what happens at the end of these videos usually?
One of them walks away and kind of like almost like they were the winner.
Okay, true. It's true. Very often you'll see that, but in any fight, let me actually take a different example here. We can take this to a less violent way. At a football game, at any sports game, if any of you play a sport, at the very end of a match, when the game is over, what is the first thing that you do?
Shake hands with the other team.
You shake hands with the other team, or cheer for the other team. Why do you do these things? Why shake hands with them?
I guess as a sign of respect.
What happens if you were to not shake your opponent's hand, if you were not to show them respect? You were not, say, at the very end of the game, you say, you know what, that was really tough. It was a close score. I won, but you know what? Good game, good job. Or I lost, and good game, good job. You did well. Why do that? It's tradition, but it's tradition for a reason.
I guess it doesn't make you look as bad.
Okay, how so? How does it not make you look as bad?
Actually, it just seems like something you would do. It's odd.
Yeah, it's one of those traditions that we have, but unless you stop and you think about it, you go, wait, why am I doing that? Why am I shaking my opponent's hand? Well, one of the nice little answers to this is if you compare conflict within humans to conflict within other types of non-human primates, things like chimps, bonobos, orangutans, all that, they get into conflict too. They fight, they duke it out, they hate each other for a while. But usually what you'll see is after the fight at some point, either the loser or the winner, one of the aggressors will come up and they might sit behind the other chimp, for example, and start grooming them, right? Kind of combing through their hair, picking out parasites, just being nice to them. What we know about conflict resolution and signals of respect in humans and non-humans is if you get into a fight with someone and then you don't show respect for them afterwards, you don't shake their hand, you don't try to resolve that conflict, you tend to build bad blood. You tend to hold resentment. Both parties tend to hold resentment. And especially within a closed group where you're probably going to interact with someone again and again and again, it's important for you to not maintain that bad blood, to resolve that conflict, to not escalate the aggression or keep that aggression around, because you need to get along. So chimps do this. They realize, okay, if I don't make up with this other chimp, it's probably not going to be good for our group. Same with any sport. The reason you shake hands with the opposing team is you're gonna have to play against them again one day. You might interact with them in a mixer. You might X, Y, and Z, be involved with them in some capacity. So showing respect is a way. It's forward thinking. It's a way to think, okay, one day I'm gonna have to interact with them again, and I don't want there to be this simmering resentment between us. So we actually found that people do this. What we did was we looked at some of these street fighting videos. We asked people to kind of rate how likely someone was to actually be more likely to interact with someone in the future. But more interestingly, we actually had people play a video game. We had people play Street Fighter, where they were either manipulated to systematically win or systematically lose the match. That is, they were always winning or they were always losing. Their likelihood of showing respect to the other person, actually shaking their hand or saying, hey, good game, good job, GG in game speak, and kind of looking at how that influenced people's ratings of the other person. So that was an interesting study that we did. I've also done some work on physiological cues of things that people look at when they're evaluating a potential romantic partner. I apologize, my cat is back there playing with something very noisy. So this article on the bottom right, the relative importance of sexual dimorphism, fluctuating asymmetry, color cues to health during evaluation of potential partners, facial photographs. It turns out that by looking at someone's face, there's actually a fair amount of information that you can infer about them. Now, in terms of personality and trustworthiness, you tend not to get a lot from that. But one of the things that does tend to poke out is you can assess things like people's health, people's history of health throughout their life, and then certain aspects of their masculinity or femininity. That is, how male typical or female typical do they tend to be? So sexual dimorphism refers to the differences between men and women's faces or bodies in general that are influenced by various sex hormones that give rise to those differences. So for example, men's faces. Men tend to have wider jaws. That is, the distance from here to here tends to be greater. The distance, eyebrows tend to be thicker. Eyes actually tend to be smaller. Women actually have slightly larger eyes overall. And they tend to be further apart, whereas men's tend to be closer together. So there are systematic differences between men and women in their faces. And so depending on the degree to which a face looks more masculine, more male typical, or more feminine, female typical, we can and do infer things about a person, that someone's going to act a certain way. Fluctuating asymmetry, that refers to the degree to which the left and right side of your body looks the same. So if you were to draw a line directly down the center of your face, you'd be able to flip one side over the other and see if they match. It turns out, genetically, pretty much every organism is, for the most part, prepared to be almost perfectly symmetrical. If someone or an animal, this is not just humans, is not perfectly symmetrical, what that indexes is that throughout at some point in their lifespan, they may have had a nutritional deficiency, they may have had a disease, they may have had some kind of developmental issue, some problem that interrupted development and actually caused their left and right side of their body to not perfectly match. Now, this does not mean that if you're not perfectly symmetrical, there's something wrong with you. Everyone's a little bit asymmetrical. But there are some people who are more symmetrical versus less symmetrical. And what we tend to do is evaluate people who are more symmetrical as more attractive. This tends to be why if you see a newscaster or you see some of the most popular kind of YouTube people, they tend to have fairly symmetrical faces if you look at them directly on. People just are really attracted to symmetry. And then we also have color cues of health. I'm not talking about skin pigmentation. I'm talking about the degree to which, sorry, it is pigmentation, but not melanin, that the differences between relatively more whitish, yellowish skin and darker brownish, blackish skin. I'm talking about pigments that determine the amount of redness in your skin, and also to some degree the yellowness in your skin. The redness of your skin actually comes from blood being rushed to the surface of the skin. So we can actually infer some aspects of a person's health depending on how much redness is in the skin and how it's distributed throughout the skin. And in terms of yellowness of the skin, this is true for everybody. There's always yellow pigments in everyone's skin. And so if you have less of that yellow pigment, you tend to have that pale look to you, versus if you have relatively more yellow pigment, there's kind of that healthy glow. That pigment turns out to be directly related to your health status, at least your current health. So if you eat more vegetables, if you eat things that have the nutrients that you need to create that yellow pigmentation, or that pigmentation within the skin, really all kinds of pigmentations, you will look healthier. Your skin will have that glow to it. Anyone who has a balanced diet or has switched from maybe an unhealthier diet to a better diet has probably noticed that to some degree. So information from our faces, I've done research on what we can infer from people's faces, just from mere acquaintance with them. All right, this is some of my research. Where I've gone at this point is I've migrated to some degree from researching romantic relationships to also including an element of morality. That is, within the context of relationships, what do we consider right or wrong? One of the studies I've done on this was looking at what are called May-December romances. Does anyone know what a May-December romance is? This is kind of an old-timey term. No one really uses it anymore, but have you heard of this?
Yeah. It's when one is older than the other.
Yeah, one's much older than the other. It's like, I guess Hugh Hefner's, I think he passed away a couple years ago, but Hugh Hefner was a good example, right? Where you have this exceptionally older man living in the Playboy Mansion with many exceptionally younger women. It's gold digger status, or cougar, right? Much older woman with a much younger man. Well, what we tend to do overall is people tend not to approve of relationships that have an age discrepancy. A much older person with a much younger person. Why? First off, evaluate whether you hold that own bias. If you hear, for example, if you hear that a 35-year-old man is dating an 18-year-old girl, do you have a reaction to that?
Yeah.
What is that reaction? How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that?
Feel like the age difference is based around I feel like it's more based around the way that somebody, not really their looks, but they look different, and maybe you can tell that one person has had more experiences than the other person, and so they should know better.
True. And I think that's a really big point here, is that someone who is older will have more life experiences, they will know more, and therefore if you have someone who's much older paired with someone who is much younger, that older person will have to some degree an advantage over the younger person. And so in situations where an older person might exploit the younger person or trick the younger person or deceive them, we might say, no, that's not going to float. We don't really like that. A lot of people look at age discrepant relationships and they say, there's something off about that. I don't really like that. Or, if you find out, especially if it's personal, you find out that, your sister or your daughter or I'm making this about women, but it's about men too. You find out that one of your siblings is dating someone much older than them. You might look at that and go, okay, well, I hope there's nothing weird going on here. And you don't really think about that when you think of them dating someone who's the same age. So we tend to stigmatize these relationships, and we tried to figure out why. And one of the hypotheses that we tested was that people may have a problem with age discrepant relationships to the degree that they also have a problem with transactional relationships. That is, prototypical example would be sex work. Depending on what you think about sex work, that is, whether it's online or in person, you trading money in exchange for some kind of sexual favor. One of the kind of common elements that age discrepant relationships can have is, especially if you have an older man, and men tend to predominantly, more than women, there is to some degree an age gap. Sorry, not an age gap. There's a gender gap in what people get paid. Men do tend to have a lot more money. They're more motivated to accumulate money, and then they use that money potentially to attract women and get them to have sex with them. So to the degree that an older male might have money and a younger woman might actually want access to that money, we might think that that relationship is more based on the transaction of exchanging money for sex versus it being based on some kind of love or mutual commitment or intimacy. For some reason, we tend to prefer relationships that are based on intimacy and commitment than ones that are based on transaction. And so we tested this. We looked at whether attitudes towards prostitution and sex work are related to attitudes towards these May-December romances, and they are. There's something about your attitude towards those two things that is related. So I've looked at that. I've also looked at the degree to which trust is important within a romantic relationship. In short, in this study, top right, the primacy of trust within romantic relationships, what I did was I designed mating profiles. That is, people actually had to choose among different options of potential partners. And I used this particular advanced statistical analysis called conjoint analysis. Without bogging you down with the details, the idea is people make these choices between different profiles, and then I can determine which characteristics of those profiles were most important for people's decisions of which partner was rated higher than the other. From that analysis, what we found out was that above and beyond a lot of other characteristics, people put trust at the very top. That is, they wanted a partner who had a quality that was described as honesty, humility. That is, again, are you honest with your partner? Are you likely to exploit them for personal gain? How willing are you to do that? So people really care about whether they're going to be potentially exploited by a romantic partner. It happens a lot. So of course you'd be sensitive to it. Where I've gone from here is where my current research lies, is actually looking at monogamous and consensually non-monogamous relationships. Does anyone know what monogamy means or what consensual non-monogamy means? Have you heard of these terms before?
It reminds me of when you can have multiple relationships with people. Is that right?
Yes,
Or am I
that's
thinking
exactly
of something
right.
different?
Nope, that's exactly right.
Okay.
Monogamy is you are mated to one and only one other person. That is, you have a romantic or sexual relationship with one and only one other person. And you both agree, we're not going to have sex. We're not going to form loving, intimate attachments with other people, or at least romantic attachments. Consensual non-monogamy is, I think, something that is becoming more common. You hear about it more in the news, but also in people's personal lives. I think people are kind of willing to kind of say this out loud more, is that consensual non-monogamy is when partners agree that they can have sex or form attachments with other people. That is, it's all above board. You tell each other about it. You communicate about it. If you feel jealousy, you communicate about that jealousy. If you want to date someone else, you involve your current partner in some way, rather than going behind their back and doing it in the shadows. So I've started to look at differences between monogamy and consensual non-monogamy and how they conduct their relationships. I've looked at the process. I've looked at how people view jealousy within these relationships. I've looked at how consent matters to how people navigate jealousy. I've looked at an emotion called compersion. This is probably a word that you will not have heard of unless you've looked into consensual non-monogamy a little bit. But this is the idea that when your partner is sexually or romantically involved with someone else, rather than you being angry or jealous, etc. about it, you actually have an experience of happiness or joy. The idea is you care a lot about your partner. So if they are actually having their motives fulfilled, that is, they are having sex with someone that they really want to have sex with, or they are forming an attachment that is really meaningful to them, then you feel happy for them for having done that. They're fulfilling something that they want, that they need. They're happy, therefore you are happy. So I've looked at that emotion as well. That's a very poorly understood emotion in my evaluation, and I can't think of any other, there's no other colleague that I know of who has done a successful job of really identifying when people feel compersion and what's necessary for it, but it's a very interesting future direction. And where I'm currently aiming with my research on consensual non-monogamy is looking at why stigma exists against these individuals. And so I have a few thoughts on that. These thoughts are developed enough that I have submitted for grant money from the University of South Carolina, and they are currently funding an international project where we're looking at the strategies that people use within consensually non-monogamous relationships to reduce the conflict that they experience within their relationship. So if you feel jealousy, if you get into fights, if there's conflict between say, if you're in a relationship with one person and your relationship with another person, how do you manage jealousy and rivalry between them and among each of you? So that's an ongoing project, and I don't have any answers to that right now, but stay tuned. A couple of years, I'll let you know. We're currently in the middle of that. It's pretty exciting. All right, so my point in introducing some of that research is, again, I wanted to give you some evidence that I've been in this field for a little bit at this point. I've published, I've done work here, and hopefully what I say is worth listening to and is at least to some degree trustworthy. However, I'll say this, I think that in any given situation, you should not ever trust anyone 100% of the time. Without my knowledge, I might say something that a couple of years from now we find out isn't true. I will say this: if I don't know something, I will let you know. I have a fair amount of, I think, intellectual humility, where if I don't know something, I'll admit it. I'm not meant to be perfect. I am meant to teach you about a very specific set of things. If I don't know beyond that, I won't pretend to. Some other stuff about me outside of my professional work. I'm a pretty huge nerd, first off. I play a fair amount of video games, really love video games. Actually, over this past break, I actually, last semester was very hectic for obvious reasons. I didn't have a chance to play a lot of video games, and then I ended up playing a game called Hades. It ended up having some pretty good reviews. It was ranked the best game of the year for anyone who's into that kind of thing. It was like a roguelike game. I recommend it highly. What's that?
Plug the Discord.
Yeah, I'm not on the Discord. I'm not really involved in the communities, but I've played it a bunch at this point, at least over the break. And oh man, so good. Yeah. Oh, do I use Discord? Yeah, I do use Discord. I'm not so much involved in again, a lot of communities. I just don't have the time for it. But I used to stay in touch with some friends sometimes. We play together sometimes. A lot of my friends are not living in South Carolina. They're elsewhere, so it's a good way to stay in touch. I have played I play board games, not so much anymore, but I've played stuff like Dungeons and Dragons, which honestly, I know historically there's been a stigma against Dungeons and Dragons, but if you get the chance, I highly recommend it. To some people, it can actually be very therapeutic in addition to being fun. I would not consider myself, at least historically, I haven't considered myself a Redditor, but anyone who at this point, and this might be a more important question than ever, which social media platform do I use? I actually highly recommend Reddit. This is a system where, unlike Facebook, unlike Twitter, unlike other social media websites where you basically get the chance to like something or react to something in a positive way or just an affirmative way in some way, in Reddit what you can do is if there's something posted, you can actually upvote or downvote the content. So if something is actually not worth having in everyone's news feed, it might get enough downvotes that it just never sees the light of day. So what happens is you have a community that can actually moderate and has some has some power over what gets shown in people's news feeds, which is a very it's very grassroots. It's a very, in my opinion, almost democratic way of managing a social media website. I think Reddit's an excellent model. Check it out sometime. I'm not personally, I don't use Reddit that much. My wife uses Reddit a ton, and she has convinced me that it is a very high quality, typically high quality source of information. I'm a huge nerd, so another part is that I tend to be fairly introverted. So big public spaces, people, that's not where I derive my energy. Being in public, being in these classes, I spend energy here. I don't necessarily thrive being around people, but I do. I of course have to, and therefore I do interact with people. However, I tend to spend a lot of time by myself with my thoughts. I enjoy that. I grew up in Pennsylvania. That's where I'm originally from. I got my master's from Bucknell University, which is in the center of Pennsylvania, and then I moved to Michigan, Detroit, Michigan. Well, I lived in Pontiac, but the school was near Detroit in Michigan for my PhD. Then 2.5 years ago, I moved down here, and I've been working here ever since. I hate dressing formally, I'll say that. This is probably the most dressed up you'll ever see me. Over time, I'll probably morph into just wearing a black t-shirt, usually nothing too unprofessional, but I like to be comfortable, and I actually encourage all of you to be comfortable while you're in this class too. Not so comfortable that you fall asleep, but comfortable enough that you aren't thinking about how you look or how you look. I love public speaking, I'll say this, although I am fairly introverted. I like getting up in front of a group of people and talking. In my mind, it's kind of a puzzle, right? I have to communicate information to you, and I have to get you, hopefully, to listen to me long enough that you digest and internalize that information. That's a puzzle. That's hard to do. So I try to get better and better at that. I see it as a game. If any of you are interested in I guess kind of what frequency I'm operating at here, I drink caffeinated tea, no sugar. Those of you who, as I teach, as I lecture, I'll have you know that I'm usually about as caffeinated as tea will get you. So if you kind of want to be on the same level as me, I never suggest that anyone, uses a drug that they don't want to use, but that's about as caffeinated as I am. I find that coffee tends to make me more anxious and jittery. It doesn't really help me that much, but also not being caffeinated it makes me too low energy. So nice in-between state. I highly recommend tea if anyone is trying to moderate or control how much caffeine they intake and kind of the optimal level of stimulation, at least in my opinion. All right, here's what I am not. In this section, every time I introduce myself on this slide, this changes a little bit. So what I am not is someone who has been teaching for 30, 40 plus years. I am not old and wizened. I do have some gray hairs at this point. I started developing these a couple of years ago, so I can finally say that I have these. But the truth is, there's probably going to be a lot that I don't know, that someone with more wisdom knows more than me. So when I don't know something, again, I want to reiterate this. I will say that I don't know something. You can be fairly confident that I'm not going to try and bullshit you or talk around you. I'd rather we all just be on the same page of if we don't know something, then we don't pretend to. But given that, what I am is someone who has been in this field for a while. I've published. I've been teaching for 6 years at this point. Online teaching, I've done online teaching before, so I hope that you find that this class is well organized, that it's easy to navigate. I have been out of grad school and academia for a while, but anyone who is interested in going to grad school, whether it's for counseling or maybe research, any kind of graduate degree, I know a bit about getting into grad school, what people look for when they're looking for graduate candidates. So if you ever have that issue or you're ever looking for advice, I am here. I have advice for you, and I expect you to use me for that advice. So that's what I am. I am someone who I hope that you find is able to give you some fairly up-to-date, recent information about psychology and the like. Okay. So first things first, before we delve into our class, I want to introduce a few things. I want to go over the syllabus. I want to go through Blackboard. I will say this on Blackboard, if any of you have not yet accessed the class in Blackboard, I suggest that you try, because some people will, technology is finicky. Your account might not be linked to the class yet, or well, I guess you would have accessed Blackboard if you're in here. So we can assume that everyone accessed Blackboard at this point. Since I'm going to be uploading this for people who maybe could not make it, I'll go through these steps anyway. I'm going to open up my.sc.edu. This is the website where you'll find everything associated with your university account. I'm going to try and share this real quick. When you go to my.sc.edu, this is what it will look like. You can access your email on the left here. Blackboard, I guess your email is right here. Blackboard is right here. If you click on Blackboard, you can go to USC Columbia and 2-year campuses. And this will bring you to, first it'll bring you to a login screen. You log in through your account. Once you log in, you'll then get this screen. You navigate to the courses using this button right here. And then our course is Psych 101 501. Here, everything is set up. You obviously know where this Blackboard Collaborate is. In a second, we're going to go through this systematically, but I want to actually get to the syllabus first, I think. Oh, actually, what I want to show you first, before next class, so you have you have multiple things to do before next class, but one of the things I'd like you to do either now or sometime shortly in the future, at least before next discussion, before next class, is I want you to go to syllabus and course documents and complete the student information sheet right here. You click this and this will bring up a survey where I want you to indicate some information about who you are, what your interests are, why you're taking this class, as well as it asks questions about your experience with online teaching. I know that there was kind of an abrupt shift to online teaching within the past year, so I want to make sure everyone feels confident enough to take this class online. So please do complete this at some point in the near future. Okay. Otherwise, here's how Blackboard is set up. So at the very top, I'm going to put this in student preview mode so that I see exactly what you would see. The first thing at the top of Blackboard is a link that's called What is Due. It is what it sounds like. This is literally your guide to figuring out what you have to do before the next class. After every discussion, this will update and will tell you what you need to do for that entire week. And so this will update every week. This is what you need to do for next week. And we'll go over this in detail when we talk about the syllabus, but you'll watch a recorded lecture video that's posted to Blackboard. You'll have to read from the textbook. You'll complete and submit the Chapter 1 exam, and then you need to complete that student information sheet. That's what you need to do for the first week. So that is your lifeline. The course schedule is right below that. This outlines This again is also your lifeline. This is found on the syllabus, but I put it here so that it's super easily accessible. You don't need to go hunting down the syllabus every time you want to kind of get an overview of what the class is going to look like. Syllabus and course docs. The syllabus is here, which we'll go over in a second. There's a technology FAQ. This is something that the university put together to help students who are having technology issues. So if you have any problem with Blackboard, any problem with your USC account, any problem with accessing the internet or connectivity issues, if you have a question, it's probably here. So please use this resource if you're having those issues. And if you can access Blackboard now, but you won't be able, if you can access it now, I suggest downloading this document and saving it somewhere, because it could be that you lose access to Blackboard one day. You need to get this document, but you can't access it because it's on Blackboard. So preemptively, I would suggest that you download it. Student information sheet. There is a research participation folder. I will go over this when we talk about the syllabus, but this is where there will be a research participation component to this class where you have to complete some online and in-lab studies. All that information is here with descriptions, and I'll be adding stuff throughout the semester as need be. For example, there are some worksheets that we use for a chapter on learning. Those will all be here. So any free-floating documents tend to be in this section. Lecture recordings will be uploaded here, again, each week. This is the lecture that you'll need to view before next discussion. And then the discussion recordings, the recording of this video, will be found in this folder right here. Blackboard Collaborate is right below that. For this class, you'll have some assignments, hypothesis assignments and research proposal assignments. The outline for this is right here. We'll also go through that in a second. And then when you submit your assignments, this is where the submission links are. So you'll click here. You'll see if you're submitting hypothesis number 1, you click on hypothesis number 1. It'll navigate you to the submission link. You upload it. Everything should be submitted through a Word document, Microsoft Word document. If you do not have Microsoft Word, there are actually options. The university does, I believe, have university copies of Microsoft Word that students can download. So if you have that issue, let me know and I'll figure that out for you. But you need Microsoft Word. That is how I will, that's how, especially for research proposals, you need that.
Yeah, with student email, you get a free Microsoft account, Microsoft 360.
Excellent, perfect, thank you. Good. And how do you access that? Do you know? Is it?
You just go to the online website, sign in, and you can also download it to your computer.
Okay.
Use your school email and your school password for your school email.
Okay,
Or
perfect.
your password for your email, whichever, if you haven't changed it.
Sounds good. So yeah, is there a link on the USC website, or is it just one of those you go to Microsoft and it's pretty easy to see there?
Yeah, there's no link, but you can just search in Microsoft Outlook 365.
Okay, sounds perfect.
It is.
Thank you. Excellent. All right, that's that. There are exams for the class, and so my screen freezes up every so often. Hopefully you see the exam list here. The exams will be posted here when they're available. Then the first exam will be due next week, and that will be posted at 10:45. So once class is over, it'll pop up. You can take it any time between now and the next class. But of course, you should be watching the recorded lectures, etc., before taking it. Readings, all that. You can view your grades here, and then you can send me emails. This is how I suggest you get in contact with me. This will send directly to my USC account, which is how you should get in contact with me. Okay. Questions about Blackboard, accessing it, how it's organized, etc. Okay. Well, let's go through the syllabus now, and I want to talk a little bit about what a normal week is going to look like. Give me a second. All right, here's your syllabus. Actually, what I want to do first, excuse me. Here's what a normal week is going to look like. So discussion is going to occur according to this course schedule. So on the course schedule, there are dates. It's at the end of the syllabus. It's what's on Blackboard. There are dates listed. That is when discussion will happen. So we will meet on the days that are listed on the syllabus. Then all assignments and exams that are due that following week are due before discussion. Okay, so all assignments are due before 9:30 on the day that we meet. That will almost always be Monday. The only exception is because of MLK Day next week, we're going to be meeting on Wednesday at this time instead of Monday. Okay. Each week, you're going to have to complete recorded lectures. You'll read assigned readings. There'll be weekly exams. And depending on which week it is, you may have to complete and submit a hypothesis or a research proposal, which will be a more complicated version of one of the hypotheses. So if we go to the syllabus, just to run you through, to let you know, here's all the information you need. You know, I'm Dr. Justin Mogilski. We're meeting Mondays, 9:30 to 10:45. Those are the discussion hours. My email address is here. If you need to get in contact with me, you can use Blackboard or you can directly email me at this address. Either way, use whatever email account is going to be best for reaching you. What I also suggest is if you use some other email account, you use Gmail or use Outlook or whatever, I would connect your USC account to that email account. Forward emails from your USC account to that other Gmail account because I will be using your USC, your student account to contact you. So if I have any updates for you, that is where you're going to receive them. For my office hours, I've learned that with online, what ends up happening is sometimes people are discouraged from seeking me out because my office hours are at very specific times and they assume they can't meet any other time. So I want to emphasize this. If you would like to meet with me, and I love to meet with students, I want to help you, please do send me an email to schedule an appointment. I am fairly flexible. And so if you need to meet later in the evening, earlier in the day, I can usually make that happen. Just email me ahead of time if you would like to meet. Here's a course description. There are no prerequisites. There is a book that is required for this class. This is the book. I sent the first email that I sent around, which some of you may not have received because you may not have been registered by the time I sent that email. You can find this on Amazon. You can find this pretty cheaply online. I think you can rent it for like 20 to 30 bucks. I'm not sure how much it costs at the bookstore, but it's also available on the bookstore or at the bookstore. I recommend that you get your hands on this. It's a helpful resource. This will be a good supplement to the lectures that I give you. So it comes highly recommended. It's fairly easy to read too. It's probably one of the better introduction to psychology books that I've found at least. Here are the outcomes and objectives. You can read through these at your own pace. Here's grade determination. So first off, there's going to be a participation component to this, and how I will determine that is the first 5%, so it's worth 10% of the overall grade, the first 5% will be earned by attending these synchronous discussions or viewing the recordings, and the second 5% will be earned after watching the recorded lecture videos uploaded to Blackboard. Blackboard allows me to monitor who views what, so that's how I'll be taking attendance. For exams, each chapter will conclude with an exam. These are the weekly exams. In total, the exams are going to be worth 40% of your course grade. Exams will be administered online and be due 1 week from when they are available. So before, then they'll be made available after discussion and then be due the following discussion. All exams will be multiple choice. There's then a comprehensive final exam that's going to be worth 20% of the course grade. This comes at the very end. This is your final exam. This will contain multiple choice questions about content from any chapter covered during the semester. So just because we have covered a chapter, do not assume that you can then comfortably forget that information. It will come back one day, and you should be prepared for that. I will, when the time comes, give you preparation. I'll tell you pretty much what I want you to know on the final exam, but a lot of this class, as you'll see, builds on itself. What I try to do is I try to create a narrative, a meta narrative that tracks what we cover in the class. So it's going to be important once we're done with chapter 2 to remember a lot of what we've gone over in chapter 2, for example. So stay on top of the material. All right, then there are going to be hypotheses and research proposals. I have a separate document that describes these, but in short, each assignment will be a short 1-paragraph description of a research hypothesis that you would like to test using the scientific method. Please see the course schedule for due dates and the research hypotheses and proposals document posted on Blackboard for details and instructions. We'll go over that document in a second. Then there are research proposals. These are worth 20% of your course grade. You will write 2 proposals by the end of the semester. Each proposal will be a concise 2-page double-spaced paper for which you will elaborate one of your hypotheses. So the hypotheses are fairly short. What you'll do is you'll write 3 of them before your first proposal is due. You'll then take one of them and you'll write more about it, turn it into a 2-page paper, actually propose an experiment, a true experiment where you're manipulating variables to test that hypothesis. We'll go over that as well. There is extra credit in this class. I mentioned that there is a research participation component where you have to complete online and in-lab studies. If you do above and beyond the required amount, you can earn extra credit. So, for example, for this semester, what'll be due is you'll have to complete 2 online studies and 2 in-lab studies, or complete alternative assignments. If you complete more than that required amount, each study that you participate in beyond the required number adds an additional percentage onto your final grade. Not on an exam, not on a quiz, on your final grade. So it's a fairly substantial extra credit in my mind, but you know, it takes a little bit of work, so I think it's worth it. Plus, it I think motivates students to engage in research that they probably otherwise wouldn't, which is an important part of this class. The grade calculation is described here. There's also a grading scale to know if you get a certain percentage in this class, what that translates into in terms of letter grades. So you can see that at the end. I have some class expectations. We're going to use Blackboard. Make sure you know how to use Blackboard. The instructions for accessing it are here. Class attendance. So once a week, we'll meet for discussion via Blackboard Collaborate here. It can be found on Blackboard course site. You already know where that is. Please arrive on time. I like to start very promptly. And I find that your experience of this class is going to depend on whether you're here for the first 5 minutes. I usually do something in the first 5 minutes that really sets the tone for the rest of the class. So I highly encourage you to get here on time. You should prepare for the meetings by completing the assigned readings, assignments, recorded lectures, and online exams. Be prepared to participate in discussion. This is an opportunity for us to actually interact. Right now, I'm mostly just talking to you. This is not how it's largely going to be. I am going to be asking you a lot more questions. These meetings are an opportunity to ask questions, receive guided review of class content. It is also my opportunity to monitor your experience and respond to your needs or anxieties. I won't know what you're struggling with, what you need help with, what lands, what doesn't, what sticks, what doesn't, unless you give me that feedback. So consider this an opportunity to give me feedback. I don't know what your experience is. I am a professor that actually enjoys being criticized. If I do something or I am administering something in a way that you don't agree with or that you think could be improved, I want to hear about it. I tend to ignore my ego. I tend not to be very prideful. So please do let me have that information. I would always appreciate it. On occasion, I may call on people to answer questions or get discussion going. If you miss a discussion, a recording is uploaded to Blackboard. If I need to cancel class, I'll send an email. So please, again, be sure to either check your email frequently or link your USC email to your personal email account. Please speak with me if you expect to be excessively absent or unable to complete assignments by their due dates. I will maybe sometimes check in on you if you fall off the earth, but if you're going to be absent for a while, this is a college level class. I expect you to get in contact with me, communicate with me, let me know what's happening. I will expect you to be here, and I'll notice when you're not. But ultimately, it is your decision. It is your. I give a lot of independence in my class. You decide whether you get to show up or not. But please do let me know if you will not, because I am invested in you doing well in this class and getting the full experience out of it. So I can help you with that if you expect that. All right, research participation. You'll be required to participate in 2 in-lab, 2 online studies. I'm going to give more information about this once the in-lab studies are up and running for the semester. But in short, the requirement needs to be completed before the final exam due date. So you have the entire semester, but I recommend that you start as early as you possibly can. If you go back to Blackboard and you navigate to that research participation folder, the online studies are already there. You can participate in them now. And it's very straightforward. You go to that folder, you go to the online links folder, and then there are several studies listed there. If you meet the requirements, you click on that study, and then you just follow the instructions, and it'll tell you precisely what you need to do. If you do not complete the requirement by the end of the semester, your grade will drop a full letter. That's a huge penalty, so make sure that you get this research participation requirement done. This is something set by the psychology department. This is my own policy, so I don't have much control over this. All right, the course schedule on the next page is organized around our weekly discussions. I want to go over that. Here's some other boilerplate stuff about academic conduct and honesty and plagiarism. Please do not plagiarize. In Blackboard, I use a program that helps me identify plagiarism. So don't roll the dice, please. Add or drop in the class. There's information here for you. For anyone who needs disabilities, who needs support with some kind of disability, there is disability support services. You can access it here. I also recommend you get in contact with me directly. If I have that information, I can work with you. All right, and this is the USC Salkehatchie Pledge. Please read through this. Essentially, especially right now when the spread of COVID is dependent on whether collectively we adhere to certain guidelines, that is wearing masks, maintaining sanitation, sanitation protocols, being clean, things like that. It's important that we all kind of collectively collaborate to do that. So that's part of the USC Salkehatchie Pledge, is just living in a way that is not going to harm other people around you. Please do, if you're doing in-person stuff, be careful. All right, questions about the syllabus in general, how things are going to be graded, any of my expectations so far? Comments or questions? Okay, this is the course schedule. My class is divided up into several units. In the first unit, we're going to talk about how to use the scientific method to reduce something called cognitive bias. I don't want to get to this too soon, but the idea is we have the scientific method for a reason. And I'm going to explain why we have the scientific method. Chances are you learned about the scientific method in your high school classes or in other classes. I really want to get into the deeper stuff. Why do we have the scientific method? What happens when we don't use the scientific method to ask questions about how people think and how they behave? That's what we'll go over first. So that includes this class and then next class. I want to note right here that next class is not next Monday, again, because of MLK. It'll be on Wednesday, January 20th. That is also when the first exam will be due. So everything over here is what's going to be due on that particular day. So before discussion on the 20th is when exam 1 will be due. All right, so forth and so on. Before discussion on January 25th, exam 2 and hypothesis number 1 will be due. We'll go through unit 1. In unit 2, we'll learn a little bit about biology and some really basic nuts and bolts that we need to understand to really appreciate the study of psychology. This will probably be some of the, especially for those who are not as biologically inclined, you're not really interested in biology, this might be some of the harder material in class, but it's also the most necessary. It's also the most important. I'm a huge biology person, but I understand that other people are not. And so I try to teach it in a way that is hopefully digestible by someone who's not interested in biology. But I really do need to get into the nitty-gritty here. So be prepared for that. We'll get from neurons to learning and memory. We'll then talk about subjective experience, sensation and perception. We'll go over consciousness, which will include defining what consciousness is, but we'll also focus on sleep. And then in the second week on this, we'll talk about drugs. Not whether you should or should not use certain types of drugs, because that is a decision that you're just going to have to make for yourself over and over again throughout life, but rather what do drugs do to your nervous system? And what effects should you expect if you decide to use a certain type of drug like caffeine? In terms of, so the last unit is going to then be on psychological development and pathology. So psychological disorders, as well as human development. We'll talk about that. And then the final exam due date is listed right here. Oh, no problem, William, don't worry about it. All right, so please do use this course schedule to keep track of when certain things are due. Of course, I'll also put it in that what is due column at the tab on Blackboard. But this is your lifeline, so please keep track of this. Any questions about the course schedule?
Yeah, I was gonna ask earlier about the grading system. Will that ever be translated on Blackboard into a percent so we can see, or do we need to go back to the syllabus to check?
So Blackboard does calculate something. The problem is that, so if you're keeping up on your assignments and you are actually getting everything in on time, then yes, the percentage in Blackboard should be very close to what your final grade will be. If you are not keeping up on assignments, I will not always enter a 0 or whatever you happen to have earned immediately afterwards. So if you are not completing assignments, there may be missing information there. So it may tell you that you have a 90%, but you've actually missed a bunch of assignments, so it's not incorporating those missed assignments into the calculation. So be careful of that. But yes, it will generally, it'll kind of give you a good estimate. At the very end of the semester, your grade's going to also depend on whether you do that research credit. So your grade will change depending on that. And, you know, I also round odd percentages. So, you know, things can change, but generally it'll be about accurate, yes, if you're keeping on top of it.
Gotcha.
Other questions? Okay. All right. One of the last things I want to at least introduce you to, and I may go over in a little bit more detail next discussion, is I want to talk about the hypotheses and proposals. I mentioned that you'll be writing these hypotheses and proposals throughout the semester. Here is a description of what these assignments are and their purpose, how I think that they are a good learning experience for you. I'll just read this to you. Humans form beliefs about what is true and what is not. We form these beliefs by observing the world, detecting associations, and then using this knowledge to make decisions. Brains are well designed to detect and record patterns, but sometimes we detect and record patterns that aren't real. We believe things that seem true, but are not. To overcome this problem, we have developed the scientific method, a procedure for assessing the veracity, the truthfulness, or the accuracy of a belief. For this class, you will practice using the scientific method to examine several beliefs that you have about the human mind and the behavior it produces. Over the course of the semester, you will write 6 scientific psychological research hypotheses and 2 research proposals. A research hypothesis is a tentative statement or prediction about the relationship between 2 things or variables. For example, you may believe that a person's political beliefs, that is being a Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever, is somehow related to their willingness to wear a mask during the pandemic. Though the answer to this question may seem obvious to you, you cannot be certain that your belief is true without evidence. So each research proposal will be an opportunity to take one of these hypotheses and design an experiment that tests it, that creates evidence for your belief. So descriptions for each assignment begin on the next page. Please be mindful of the due dates, which appear on the course schedule, et cetera, et cetera. Submit via Blackboard. Here are the formatting guidelines. I'm going to go over these assignments in detail next class because the first hypothesis is not due next time, but the following class. So read over this before next class, but realize that we will go over it. Basically, here's the outline. Each hypothesis is going to be about 4 sentences, actually exactly 4 sentences in length. And I've described precisely what needs to appear in each of those sentences. Keep it concise, keep it short. Then in the research proposal, you're going to take one of your hypotheses and write a 2-page paper describing why you hold this belief and how you might test it using an experiment. And we'll go over, I'll teach you about what an experiment should look like, how you design an experiment, so you will be well prepared to do this. We'll spend quite a bit of time on that. I think it's an important skill. This will be 2 pages. I described generally what should be in each paragraph. There's some flexibility to this, but this is my guideline for you. And then I give an example of a research proposal down here for anyone who is aided by that. So this document is on Blackboard. It's underneath hypotheses and proposals. So please do read this, look at it before next class, and we'll go over it in detail then. All right. Finally, with the 2 minutes that I have of you left, here's what I want to say about video conferencing. 1, I do not require that you use a webcam in this class. That's fine. I understand that sometimes you roll out of bed and you don't have a chance to get dressed, all that stuff. I'm very familiar with all this. However, you need a mic. I want you to discuss. I want you to participate. I'll be asking questions. And this is going to be a much better experience if you are actively engaged with discussion. When you are not speaking, try to keep your mic muted. I will sometimes violate this rule myself, so I get it, but please do realize that that is good video conferencing etiquette. What I ask is that during class, you be comfortable and casual. This is not a place to be super formal. We are exploring ideas here. We're going to be, I find that learning happens best when you can be comfortable, when you can just speak frankly about things. But I do request that you be focused. If you are rolling out of bed, and this is your first class, please go splash some water on your face. Again, get a cup of tea, get yourself revved up in some way, because this is really not going to be useful to you unless you have that moment to wake up. And again, during the first couple of minutes of class is when I usually set the tone. So please come prepared to participate and be focused. And contribute to discussion. Behave as if you were having a conversation. This should not be so much me lecturing to you, although I will do that sometimes. This should be a conversation between us. So as much as you would just talk to anybody else, let's talk in this class. Of course, don't talk over other people. Don't be disrespectful, but you know what I mean. And here's another thing. During video conferencing, during these classes, we may disagree about something. When we do, I request that we talk about it. Again, if I do something or I say something that you go and you say, I don't think that's right, talk to me about it. Actually say, hey, professor, I don't think that's right, and here's why. And then we can talk about it. Do not bottle anything up. That helps nobody. All right. I am out of time, but I'll highlight this. This is what we're going to be talking about during this class. Next class, and during this next week, you're going to be learning about how psychology is a science. And what does it mean for something to be a scientific study, or for psychology to be the scientific study of the mind, relative to other styles of knowing things about the mind. So for next week, you'll be watching there's a recorded lecture video on Blackboard, completing the first exam. As you're going through the lecture, what I recommend, this is how I organize my slides in my recorded lectures. So realize that there is a section header, and then there's an indent where I might say, okay, we're going to start talking about psychoanalysis. If there's another indent, that means that I'm clarifying the thing that's directly above it. When you are taking notes, and you should take notes, try to organize them in the same way. That way, when you come back to them several weeks or several months from now, when you have to study them, possibly for the comprehensive exam, those notes make sense to you. All right? I promise this will help. help this to organize and study your notes. All right, that's all I have. Questions, concerns?
I have some concerns, but I'll discuss it
Sounds good, sounds good.
in a little.
Got it. So let me know if anyone has any trouble accessing the resources on Blackboard. Make sure you go to that what is due part of Blackboard, and I will see you next, not this Wednesday, but the following Wednesday after MLK Day. All right? Thank you, everyone. You have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you again soon.